there have been recent comments from the mid laner Doinby from FPX talking about how he has to practice longer than younger players, and it's just he has to put in more hours in order to be good at the game. Now, first, I think it's pretty ridiculous that he's 24 years old and yet he feels this way. And I think a lot of people would probably say, okay, this is a little bit ridiculous. Maybe at the age of 28 or so, or, broaching 30, more people within the esports community feel as though a player is quote unquote old at that point. So I think we can all at least agree on that perspective, but I think you could take this idea in two angles of a player getting old, or Doinby specifically in his case. And I feel like first there is the feeling that he needs to prove his worth, right? Because they've stuck with him for this long, and he needs to consistently churn out the idea that you're spending your money well as an organization, and he deserves to be in this league and to hold his spot, so to speak, right? Because they can obviously give it to a different prospect. And of course, in China, there are several different prospects, right? So he is literally fighting off these hordes of new players. And so therefore, he has to try that much harder versus someone within, say North America. They don't have to try as hard because, well, guess what? There are not that many great new players that are up and coming. So this is one of the angles that you could take with Doinby's statement, which is the angle that I would actually take more specifically. But then it's the other idea that it's because he is older, so therefore the age is impacting his ability to either improve or to learn. So with that, I want to go into some of the common arguments which are stated often, which is the idea of reaction time and the fact that as you get older, your reaction time slows down. And that is true, but I think there's a threshold as to when that actually starts to happen and your brain and your muscle memory starts to deteriorate. Because as we've seen, there's been a lot of, for instance, in the real world, Formula One drivers, you still see, middle-aged Formula One drivers, which takes an insane amount of reaction time. Specifically, not only that, let's go to esports. You see a lot of older esports players, especially in the fighting game community, which is largely, a large part of it is on reaction speed. And you still see, Daigo, or you see Mango, or you see Hungry Box. I know Mango just won a major tournament within the Smash Bros community. So I don't think, and Mango's he's like 32, I want to say, something like that, and Hungry Box is around the same age. So I don't think there's just this sudden fall off cliff of reaction time, especially so early as like 25 or even 30 years old. So that's one thing that I'd like to debunk. Now, the second portion, which is the ability to learn, I think that becomes true once again to a later extent past, such an age of 30, right? Even further past that, in fact, I would say 40 years old or even greater than that. There's this idea, or this scientific term called brain plasticity, which basically means your capacity to create new neural pathways so that your brain can reconfigure itself to then learn new shit, right? That's how we learn new habits and new things. Well, there's these two famous scientists, Dr. Kottman and Dr. Birchtold. They're both from the University of Irvine, and they did a study, and it's one of the most cited papers of all time. And in fact, Dr. Kottman is actually one of the most cited professors of all time. I think he's in the top 200 on Google Scholar. So this is a really, really big paper, and it talks about the effects of exercise when it comes to brain plasticity, and the fact that if you exercise more, then your brain is more, it's more like a sponge, right? It can create those new neural pathways just as such as a younger brain, and you can either maintain your condition of your brain or even improve it as such. And so there's this chemical like compound, or I want to say a protein. I'm not sure. I didn't read the entire scientific paper. I'll actually link it down in the description below so that you could read it if you want. But there is this protein, we're just going to go with protein, called BDNF, which stands for brain derived neurotrophic factor. And basically, what that is that when you exercise, you get more of this, and it spikes within your brain, and it affects your cerebellum, it affects your hippocampus, it affects like all different portions of your brain. And so, this is one way to keep your brain fresh. And this is also an important reason among, the health factors of itself as to why esports players should actually exercise, because it keeps your brain plasticity so that you're able to actually keep your brain condition of how you're able to learn new ideas and new functions. And so maybe with that, with age, comes the debilitating, or degradation of brain plasticity, but not at the age of 24 or even 30. This idea of exercise is actually to prevent conditions like Alzheimer's or dementia and whatnot, which is why generally you see people in older ages like 60 or 70, they're more cognitively aware if they do the little exercise, right? Like you see the fucking old people with the little 2-pound weights or whatever, and they're like run walking, and it's like good for them, like that's what their body can handle, but it also keeps their brain active as well. And so that might be a factor, but it's certainly not a factor at age 24. So now there is one comment that I would like to address, which there has been something said within Korea, in fact, in that Rush, the former player from Cloud9 and of course KT Rolsters, and now he is enlisted in the military, but he went on to say on stream that essentially Korea is ageist, right? They have a lot of ageism there, and they won't take a chance, or rather they'll take a chance on a newer player rather than a proven older player, which is why there's such a stigma in Korea surrounding age. And I'll actually link that video down below. It's a Twitch clip of him talking about it while he's playing a solo queue game. And this is something that just isn't talked about a lot, of ageism within esports, and it's way more relevant within Korea, but it's certainly broaching the idea within North America or within Europe itself too, and even the LPL, as you can see. And it's like this whole idea that these orgs think that they're going to get something way better than the product that they're getting now with this older player, which is, it's a little absurd in and of itself, because the game constantly changes, and you would think, okay, well, if the game constantly changes, then that means it's not that much of a risk to get a new player. But it's like, well, if you see the track record of this player going through all these different metas and being able to keep pace with that, then I see no reason as to why they can't keep doing the same thing over and over again in different metas. They already have a track record of, say going through a carry jungle meta and then going through a tank meta, right? It's like, well, why couldn't they just keep going with all the different other metas that then appears? They've already been battle tested, as it were. That's why I, always say it's very difficult or very risky to take a chance on, say, a rookie jungler, for instance. I think that's one of the harder roles to take a chance on. And, it's like that whole, if you guys are old enough, if you've ever seen that episode of Family Guy where Peter is talking to like this real estate agent about a timeshare, and he's like, so you're here to get your free, yacht or boat, or you could get this mystery box. And Peter's just like, well, I'm going to go for the mystery box because, I could get a fucking boat in the mystery box. There could even be a boat in there. And these are what these organizations are doing. They're just like, well, I could get the older player or I could get this mystery box. And it's like, there could even be, this really skilled player that is just like the old player. It's like, well, why not just get the old player? And so I think with this entire mindset, there is something lurking in the background, which I find very disturbing because there is this narrative of old players being washed up, uh, in essence. And this is partly from fan sentiment because fans are just completely negative, and once they find something that they can shit on of a player, they're just going to ride that to the ends of the earth, right? Which is why players get so maybe burnt out from fan sentiment, but then this perpetuates over into team organizations as such. But also I think this is this whole idea of older players being washed up. I think this is a partial propaganda because if you think about it, just weighing two different players at similar skill and one player is older, generally the older player, first of all, is going to want higher salary just because he's older and he expects to progress within his career. And in League of Legends, as such, there really isn't any other role that you can progress to that is higher, than being a player itself, right? In terms of, it's not like a regular company to where you could be like a cashier and then you're a cashier supervisor and then, you're a store director, right? Like there is no progression. It's just player. That's it, right? So obviously, the only way that you can progress is monetarily. So that as a veteran player, you want to progress monetarily. So that's the only way to do that. And in fact, you also then request more money because of your brand, right? Because typically, a older player will have a better brand than a newer player. And so with this as such, I think teams are cynically putting this partial propaganda out to say, well, this player is older. We wanted to go for this newer player, because they're young and they're hungry. And it's like, yeah, no, also you have to just pay the older player more money. This is why I think it was a episode on like the Crackdown or something with Thorn and Dom or some shit recently, very recently. Thorn goes on to say that, yeah, Mithy didn't take the Origin offer because it was the minimum salary. It's like, yeah, a legendary player like Mithy isn't going to take a minimum salary because his brand, his legacy, all of this shit. And so you're saying even if that person is like the same skill level, which they're not, but even still, he's going to want more money anyways, just because of his experience and whatnot. So I think this entire idea of just old players being washed is in part partial propaganda from the organizations themselves. So with that said, I think the reason why a lot of older players just don't want to do anything with, esports itself is, first of all, because it was impossible to do in the very beginning because you could just make more money in a different field and it didn't matter what field, right? You were making like $20,000 a year as a professional player. You could make that more, at any regular job or, say progress a couple years and then you could make more with a college degree, right? So obviously esports wasn't a long-term idea, right? And on top of that, you have to prioritize of being the best within a chosen field, right? You have to sacrifice a lot of different things in order to be the best within a field. That's what it means to be, because everyone else is going to be doing this in order to become the best. And you're also competing against a huge amount of people, right? How many people? There's like 120 million people in the League of Legends player base. Sure, not all of them are competing to become pro, but you still have to fight against a lot of them in order to get into that spot to become a professional. And so with that said, League of Legends also too has one of the longest calendars out of any major esport, just point blank period. We have a ridiculous calendar that is basically all year long, and then you possibly get a break in the winter time of like 1 month, and that's if you do go to All Stars. Then if you don't go to All Stars, you get like 2 months off. So this is the most ridiculous calendar schedule in any fucking sport possible. So you can see as to why someone wouldn't want to do this for the rest of their life and, into the later parts of their adulthood. And to have a healthy life, no, I don't believe anyone at the top of their field actually has a healthy life because they've dedicated all of their hours in order to pursue being the top at this profession. No one at the top of any profession, I would say, has a healthy life whatsoever. 99.999% of people don't do that, and generally it's because they don't have the will to do it, but also because it requires a lot of fucking sacrifice. And I think it's perfectly acceptable that you don't want to do that sacrifice. And I think as people get older, generally they don't want to continue making that sacrifice over and over again, especially with a game that's changing constantly, like a League of Legends, which patches once every 2 weeks, which is absurd, which is also why you see longer longevity in different games, because they don't patch as much, so therefore you don't have to learn all these new different things and keep like changing up your playstyle or whatnot so drastically as well too, right? You can keep all the same old habits and whatnot. And, generally, I would say also, too, with this entire sacrifice, you could look at different areas as to maybe the shortcomings of a particular player and whatnot. Like, for instance, their social awkwardness. You could see a lot of esports players are socially awkward. They don't know how to speak that well. And it's because they've sacrificed their social life in order to get really fucking good at that game. That's the type of sacrifice that you need to do in order to be the best. Are people saying that that's healthy? No, but they are saying that that is what is actually necessary to become the best. And if there was a better way to do that, then yes, people would be doing that. But so far, we haven't figured out a better way to do that other than just the grind itself, because there are the same 24 hours in everyone's fucking day. And if you use more 24 hours or more hours in the day than the next guy, then you're going to win. And on top of that, if you do 60 hours in a work week and I do 80 hours in 3 years, you aren't ever going to be able to catch up to me. It's going to be impossible for you to catch up to me at that point. I'm going to be so fucking crazy far ahead of you. It's going to be absurd. And this is how you have to look at it when you're going to be a top competitor, is that these little different edges of me putting in 1 hour extra a day than you, eventually I'm going to be so much fucking better than you. It's not even going to be funny. So with that in mind, I've worked with like some high executives before, and their life is like 16-hour work days. Like, no kidding. They're just fucking pedal to the metal from like 5 a.m. all the way to like, I don't know, like 9-10 p.m. And it's just stupid absurd. And to have that kind of drive has a lot of different tolls that get taken upon you, right? Like, they sacrifice their time with their family. Maybe they have kids, maybe they don't have kids, and the reason being is because they don't have fucking time for it. And you can really see just the life that they have. Yeah, sure, they have all this money and shit, but no one looks at the other side of it, that they've sacrificed all this other shit in order to get to that point and to grind to that point. Because they're competing with all these other businesses as well too, that are putting in those ridiculous hours. So the whole idea of esports in general and being a professional, this isn't about the human holistic experience. Because if we were talking about that, then we would never be talking about the 0.01% of the best within any particular field. We would just be talking about regular Joe Schmo. And as such, you have to sacrifice a lot. And it's not saying that anyone is forcing them to do this. You aren't forced to be the best basketball player of all time. You aren't forced to do that, in fact, right? And it just the same thing of working at a grocery store. It's like, yeah, you're kind of forced to do that because you have to make a living to some extent, but you aren't forced to be the best fucking grocery store worker of all time, right? Like that. There's the big distinct factors that to be the best, it's not a forced condition, but it will cost you a lot of just your holistic human experience. And that sucks, but that's what it takes. And to go back into the whole idea of ageism, LS has stated multiple times that in Korea, they are very ageist. And in fact, they have passed on a lot of players within the solo queue ladder or whatever because they're like 22 years old, which is absurd. 22 years old, you could barely fucking drink in the United States, right? And so, but in the aspect of the Korean culture, it's like 22 years old is pretty fucking old to be a pro player, at least in their eyes, right? And so LS was just completely pissed off about this aspect and the fact that this ageism exists so hardcore in Korea. And I feel like it's kind of spreading out within other areas of esports or within League of Legends at least. And so with that said, of perfection and the sacrifice and the reason maybe as to why older players don't stick around, although they are sticking around a little bit more and more because the money is actually good at this point, right? You could make $400,000 a year if you're good enough at the game. You're not the best, but you're pretty damn good. And so as such, though, I still don't envy these players. I don't envy the fakers of the world that have sacrificed their entire basically childhood and to adulthood. I don't envy people that are the best in the world at any particular thing. I don't really care what it is, but I do celebrate their sacrifice to show the world what excellence means and looks like at one specific thing. That's the thing that I respect about these people. And I think that's the thing that should actually be celebrated. And the fact that maybe, a person wants to give that up a little bit in some aspect or whatnot. Like, yes, to an extent that should be knocked against them, in fact, because of the whole ageist factor, right? Or the fact that they maybe might want to have a family, or they might want to go out and get a girlfriend or get married or have a house or have different priorities, whatever. Like, yeah, that could be a knock against them because they aren't playing the game. But I also, too, think that there is this cynical idea of just like, well, yeah, let's hit them with the age factor because then we can pay these other younger players less money. So I really do think that there is a clear ageism that is going on within esports, and especially over in other areas and such. And it's kind of disappointing to see.